With us this Sunday morning, one of the greatest ladies in New York that I know, Betsy McCaughey. Betsy McCaughey served as lieutenant governor in New York from 1995 to 1998. She worked for the Manhattan and the Hudson Institutes, and currently she's chairman of the Committee to Reduce Infection Deaths, RID, R-I-D. She's an expert in Obamacare, and recently she has written great columns on the challenge of Washington's response to the Ebola experience. Betsy, what's going on this Sunday morning? What's going on in New York? Can New York handle this Ebola problem?
Well, I'm very concerned, John. Most Americans have no risk of contracting Ebola, but healthcare workers or doctors and nurses are at risk. And we saw what happened in Texas at Texas Health Presbyterian, a highly regarded 900-bed hospital. Two nurses there became infected when they were treating a patient named Thomas Duncan who brought Ebola from Africa. I'm very concerned about our healthcare workers here in New York. We hear the governor, Andrew Cuomo, and the mayor, Bill de Blasio, telling us that they're getting our hospitals ready. But this isn't something you can do overnight. It would be like telling me I can play Carnegie Hall if I start taking piano lessons next week. It's a much longer process, and I've spent the last decade in our hospitals advocating for patient safety. As you know, you're a generous contributor to the Committee to Reduce Infection Deaths, and I can tell you from that experience that our hospitals are not ready for Ebola. Hospitals that can't stop staph and C. diff and other common infections that are raging through their hallways cannot control Ebola.
Tell me, this Dr. Craig Spencer, that was our first case in New York. What happened with him? Because I've gotten reports that he wasn't treating Ebola patients. He was busy delivering babies.
Well,
have you heard that at all?
He was working for Doctors Without Borders in what we call the hot zone, those three countries that are unfortunately have been ravaged by Ebola. And unfortunately, Doctors Without Borders does not isolate their medical staff for a period of time after they've been working in the hot zone and before they allow them to get on commercial jets and come home. And that's a problem. That's something that has to change because these doctors and nurses are very dedicated. We're glad they're doing what they're doing. It's God's work. But there should be a period of time where they have to wait it out and demonstrate that they have not become infected before they get on an airplane, John.
Betsy, he was riding around in the subways, eating in restaurants, and going bowling in Brooklyn. Do you have any worries about him being able to pass it on to anybody?
Of course, there's always some risk. But as I said, the big risk, the risk that really puts a lump in my throat, is the risk to healthcare workers. We can see that in Texas, it was the nurses directly treating Thomas Duncan who became ill rather than even his family members who shared an apartment with him. It's the nurses particularly who were exposed to bodily fluids and who are next to the patient at his or her sickest moment. And that's why I'm very worried about our nurses. 236 doctors and nurses have already died treating Ebola patients.
Have you talked to any of the nurses in New York City? Are they worried?
Oh, nurses are very worried. I've talked to nurses all over the country. They are very worried. They're worried because even with this elaborate protective gear that now the CDC has finally come around to recommending, even with those space suits that you've seen on television, doctors and nurses still become infected. It sometimes happens when the doctor or nurse is actually taking off that gear. It's such a dangerous proposition that one misstep, for example, a nurse in Spain simply brushed her gloved hand against her cheek as she was removing her protective gear and infected herself that way.
Oh, my God. Well, Betsy, thank you so much for being with us this morning, and thank you for doing God's work. And I want to publicly thank you for 4 years ago when I had to go in for an operation, how you briefed my family on how to handle things, and everything came out great. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad it did, John, and anyone can come to hospitalinfection.org and get that same life-saving information.
And you are responsible for reducing infections in hospitals because you have made them know about what they have to do that's right, and they're doing it.
Yes, they are. We're going to reduce those infections. Take care, John. Wishing you
Thank you,
good health.
Betsy. Have a great Sunday. You're at the Cats Roundtable. We'll be back to you after a few moments.
News, opinion,